My name is Amelia, and for the first 24 years of my life, I was a product. I was a Brentwood. That name, in our corner of New England, meant something. It meant old money, generational power, and a suffocating, soul-crushing set of expectations. My value wasn't in who I was, but in who I would marry, and what merger that marriage would represent. When I met Leo, a penniless sculptor who worked with scrap metal and had more passion in his little finger than my entire family had in their sprawling mansion, I knew I had a choice. When I chose him, my family didn't just disown me, they surgically erased me from their lives. For 10 years I've been gone. 10 years of struggle, of love, of building a life from absolute scratch. 10 years of them pretending I never existed. Yesterday, their empire, Brentwood Industries, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And this morning, for the first time in a decade, my mother called, weeping. They're coming here, to my home, begging for a handout from the daughter they threw away. They think I'm a gallery manager, some quiet, artsy woman who probably has a guest room and a soft heart. They have no idea that the poor man they mocked is now the most celebrated and wealthiest anonymous designer in the world. And they have no idea that the daughter they disowned is his CEO. This isn't just a family reunion. It's a reckoning. If you've ever felt like the black sheep, the one who didn't fit in, the one who was told your choices were wrong, you're gonna want to stick around for this. This one is for us. Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. What's the one thing you would say to the people who underestimated you if you finally had them in your power? Growing up, a Brentwood was like living in a beautiful, priceless, airtight museum. Our home in Greenwich, Connecticut, wasn't a house, it was an estate. It had a name, Willowmere, and a staff that outnumbered our actual family of 4. My entire life was a performance, and my parents, Charles and Eleanor Brentwood, were the exacting directors. Charles was the CEO of Brentwood Industries, a textiles empire started by his great-grandfather. He was a man who didn't speak, he pronounced. He saw the world in terms of assets, liabilities, and lineage. My mother, Eleanor, was his perfect partner. A woman so polished, so controlled, she looked like she was carved from expensive marble. Her entire job was to maintain the flawless, icy facade of the Brentwood name. Then there was my brother, William. 1 year older, he was the heir, the prince. He was a carbon copy of my father, cold, ambitious, and utterly obsessed with the idea of our family's power. He and I were not siblings. We were competitors in a silent, lifelong race for our father's approval, a race I was destined to lose. I was the daughter. My job was simple. Be beautiful, be quiet, get a respectable and useless art history degree from Yale, and then marry Gregory Vandersloot, the bland, chinless heir to a banking fortune. Our engagement had been understood since we were in diapers. It wasn't a romance. It was a merger. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I spent my days drifting from charity luncheons with my mother to sterile, joyless dinners with Gregory, all the while suffocating under the crushing weight of their expectations. My one secret act of rebellion was my job. I'd used my art history degree to get a position as a lowly, underpaid assistant at a small, avant-garde art gallery in Soho. I took the train into the city 3 days a week, a commute my parents tolerated because it was respectable and kept me occupied. They assumed it was a hobby, a little placeholder I was playing with before my real life, my marriage to Gregory, began. They had no idea it was my only escape, my only oxygen. The gallery was small, gritty, and alive. It was the only place I felt like myself. My boss, a tough, brilliant woman named Sasha, didn't care that I was a Brentwood. She just cared that I worked hard. And I did. I worked harder than anyone. It was the one part of my life I had earned. My father, of course, found it charming, but temporary. "It's good you're getting this bohemian phase out of your system, Amelia," he said one night at dinner, not even looking up from his Wall Street Journal. "Gregory's mother and I were just finalizing the guest list for the engagement party. We'll need you to quit that little gallery job, of course. The wife of a Vandersloot can't be seen handling packages." William smirked at me from across the table. "Don't worry, Amelia. I'm sure Gregory will let you decorate one of the guest houses." I remember looking at the 3 of them, my father, my mother, my brother, their perfect, cold, polished faces, and feeling a profound, terrifying wave of despair. This was it. This was my future. A life sentence in a gilded prison, married to a man I didn't love, becoming a woman I already despised. I was 24 years old, and my life was already over. I felt a scream building in my throat, a scream I had been swallowing for my entire life. I just smiled, dabbed my lips with the heavy linen napkin, and said, "Of course, Father. Whatever you think is best." 2 weeks later, I was sent to a warehouse in a part of Brooklyn I'd been warned never to go to. Sasha, my boss, had tasked me with scouting a new artist, a sculptor who worked with reclaimed metal. "He's rough, Amelia," she'd warned, "but he's a genius. Just don't wear your good shoes." I showed up in jeans and boots, my heart pounding, with a nervous, excited energy. This felt real. The warehouse was a freezing, cavernous, and slightly terrifying space that smelled of rust, welding torches, and motor oil. And in the center of it, under a single, bare bulb, was him. He was tall, dressed in filthy work overalls, his face smudged with grease. He was welding, a bright, violent shower of blue sparks obscuring his face. He didn't hear me come in. I just stood there, watching. He was working on a massive, 7-foot-tall figure that looked like a fallen angel, its wings crafted from the mangled doors of a junked car. It was breathtaking. It was powerful, and raw, and full of a painful beauty I had never seen before. When he finally shut off the torch and lifted his welding mask, I wasn't prepared. He wasn't the rough, older man I had expected. He was young, maybe 30, with a lean, hungry face, a mess of dark, curly hair, and the most intense, piercing blue eyes I had ever seen. He looked at me not with the polite deference or the veiled or unveiled interest I was used to, but with a kind of wary, analytical curiosity. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low rasp. I'm Amelia, from the Vanguard Gallery. Sasha sent me to see your work." He wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag and nodded, his expression unreadable. "Right, the uptown girl." He gestured around the chaotic, freezing studio. "Well, this is it. It's not exactly the Met. It's incredible," I breathed, walking slowly toward the metal angel. The sense of movement, the way you've used the decay. It's junk," he said, but not unkindly. "It's the stuff your world throws away. I like to give it a second life." He looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt as if he could see right through my carefully constructed Brentwood facade, right down to the real, rusting, junked parts of me. "My name's Leo," he said, finally holding out his rough, grease-stained hand. I shook it, and I felt a jolt, a spark more real than the one from his welding torch. We talked for 2 hours. He was brilliant. He was self-taught, well-read, and fiercely, terrifyingly intelligent. He spoke about art, philosophy, and physics, with a passion that made my respectable Yale degree feel like a piece of worthless paper. He was the first person in my entire life who had never once asked me what my father did. He didn't care. He was asking me what I thought. I left his studio that day feeling like I'd just woken up from a 24-year nap. I was dizzy with it. I went back to my job at the gallery, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was him, his studio, his work. A week later, I used the excuse of gallery business to go back. I brought him coffee. He showed me his new piece. We talked for 3 hours. The next week, I brought him pizza. We talked for 5. It was the most terrifying, most wonderful, and most real thing that had ever happened to me. We fell in love over welding torches and takeout boxes, in a freezing warehouse that felt more like home than my family's sterile, silent mansion. He was everything my family despised. He was poor. He was self-made. He was unapologetically real. He didn't just see the real me, buried under all the privilege and expectations. He insisted on her. He made me feel possible. We kept it a secret for 3 months. It was a beautiful, stolen, dangerous bubble of time, but I knew it couldn't last. The date of my official engagement party to Gregory was looming. I was living a double life, and the walls were closing in. One night, sitting in his studio, sharing a cheap bottle of wine, I finally told him the truth. All of it. The Brentwoods, the textiles, Gregory, the suffocating, prearranged life that was waiting for me. He was quiet for a long time, just looking at the metal angel. "So you're a princess," he said finally, his voice flat. "I'm not," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "I'm a prisoner." "So leave," he said, turning to look at me, his blue eyes intense. "A cage is only a cage if you don't have the key. You're the one holding it." "It's not that simple, Leo," I cried. "My family. My life." "That's not a life, Amelia," he said, taking my hands. "That's a balance sheet. Your father's balance sheet. What about yours?" I knew he was right. I was terrified. But for the first time, I was more terrified of not leaving. That night, I made my choice. I was going to tell my family. I was going to choose him. I was going to choose me. I had no idea what that choice would truly cost. The dinner was staged as my, quote, pre-engagement celebration. The entire, extended Brentwood clan, plus the Vandersloots, were gathered in the cavernous, oppressive dining room at Willowmere. I had asked to bring a +1, a request that had been met with a confused, icy silence from my mother. A +1, Amelia? Gregory is your escort. Who else could you possibly be bringing? A friend, I'd said, my voice shaking. He's an artist. His name is Leo. The silence on the other end of the line was so cold, I thought the phone might freeze. I see, she'd said finally. Well, if you must, I suppose we can find a place for him. Leo, to his credit, was a rock. He showed up at my condo in a borrowed suit that was a little too big in the shoulders, his hands scrubbed raw, but still unable to hide the faint, dark lines of grease embedded in his skin. He looked like a wolf in a sheep's pen, and I had never loved him more. Ready to go into the lion's den, he'd murmured, squeezing my hand. As long as you're with me, I'd replied. Walking into that dining room was the hardest thing I've ever done. The conversation didn't just stop, it died. It was sucked into a black hole of judgment. I saw my father's eyes narrow, my mother's face freeze into a mask of polite horror, and William, my brother, just smirked, a cruel, satisfied look. He'd been waiting for me to fail, and here I was, presenting my failure on a silver platter. Gregory, my supposed fiancé, just looked confused, as if a dog had just wandered into his country club. Father, mother, I said, my voice trembling but clear. This is Leo. My partner. The word partner hung in the air like a declaration of war. My father didn't stand. He just stared at Leo, his gaze traveling from the ill-fitting suit down to his worn-out shoes. An artist, my father said, the word tasting like something rotten in his mouth. How novel. The dinner was a blur of passive-aggressive torture. My mother asked Leo, "And where do you, summer, mister?" "I work, Mrs. Brentwood," Leo had replied, his voice calm, meeting her gaze. "In the summer and the winter." Gregory tried to engage him in a conversation about the stock market, which Leo parried by asking Gregory's opinion on the socio-economic implications of late-stage capitalism. It was a disaster. Finally, after dessert, my father tapped his glass with a spoon. "Amelia." "Leo." A word. In my study. The study was my father's inner sanctum, a dark, wood-paneled room that smelled of old leather and power. My mother, William, and Gregory followed us in. The door was closed. It felt like an execution. My father stood behind his massive, 19th-century desk. "I am going to be very clear," he began, his voice devoid of any emotion, "because I am deeply embarrassed. For you, Amelia, and for this family." He gestured at Leo. "This relationship is over. It is a childish, pathetic phase, and it ends tonight." "Father, you don't understand," I started. "I love." "You love?" He spat the word. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You know duty. You know legacy. You know the name you carry. You are a Brentwood, and you will marry Gregory Vandersloot. This engagement is not a request. It is a merger. It is the bedrock of this company's future." "And what if I say no?" I whispered, my hand finding Leo's. "Then you are no longer a Brentwood," he said, his voice as cold and final as a tomb. "This isn't a game, Amelia. This is the ultimatum. You will walk out of this room, you will tell this person to leave, and you will beg Gregory for his forgiveness for this humiliating lapse in judgment. Or you will walk out of this house, and you will never, ever come back. Your name will be removed from the family trust. Your bank accounts, which I fund, will be frozen before you hit the driveway. The condo, which the trust owns, will be unavailable to you. You will be cut off, completely. You will have nothing." I looked at my mother. She was standing by the fireplace, her face pale, but her eyes were hard. She was in agreement. "Your father is right, Amelia," she said. "You're ruining everything. After all we've given you. This is the thanks we get. You choose this over your own family." "He is my family," I said, my voice shaking but my resolve hardening. "Then you are both fools," my father said, turning his back to us. "Get out of my house." The walk out of that room, out of that house, was the longest of my life. I felt the eyes of my brother and Gregory on my back, their silent, smug, triumphant stares. I didn't look back. I just held onto Leo's hand as he led me out the massive front door, into the cold night air, and into a future that was a complete, terrifying blank. The heavy oak door of Willowmere shut behind us, with the definitive, echoing thud of a vault. Part 4. The Exile and the Hustle. We drove away in my car, the one respectable thing I still owned. I was in a state of shock, the adrenaline of the confrontation giving way to a cold, nauseating terror. I had just walked away from everything. My home, my money, my family, my entire identity. I had nothing. I was nobody. I was also, for the first time in my life, completely and utterly free. Leo was quiet on the drive, his hand a warm, solid presence on my knee. He didn't say "I told you so." He didn't say what now. He just let me be. We got back to his freezing one-room studio in Brooklyn, and I just broke. I sat on his lumpy, second-hand couch, and I cried. I cried for the father I had, for the father I wished I'd had. I cried for the loss of my home, my mother, my past, and I cried from sheer, paralyzing terror. What were we going to do? Well, Leo said after I'd finally exhausted myself, handing me a piece of rough paper towel and a cup of lukewarm tea. First, we sleep. Tomorrow, we build. And that's exactly what we did. The next 10 years were a blur. They were the hardest, most brutal, and most incredible years of my life. We were, as my family had intended, destitute. My bank accounts were, as promised, frozen. I was locked out. I had my car, a suitcase of designer clothes I immediately sold for cash at a high-end consignment shop, and a few $1,000s in my personal checking account that my father hadn't been able to touch. It was enough. It was a start. We moved out of New York. The shadow of my family, of Gregory, of that whole world, was too long. We pooled our meager resources and moved to Philadelphia, a city where no one knew the name Brentwood. We found a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a run-down neighborhood, with peeling paint and a radiator that banged all night. It was heaven. And we hustled. God, how we hustled. I swallowed my pride, the last, bitter remnants of my Yale art history degree, and I got a job. A real job. I became a waitress at a high-end bistro, a job I was actually pretty good at. I knew the food, I knew the wine, and I knew how to talk to rich, demanding people. I worked double shifts, my feet aching, my hands raw from the hot water, and I brought home cash every single night. Leo, seeing that his art alone couldn't support us, did the one thing he knew how to do. He worked with his hands. He took a job at a small, local construction company, doing manual labor. He'd come home, covered in dust and drywall, his hands blistered, and he would still go into the tiny, freezing studio, a corner of our living room, and weld his sculptures until 2 a.m. It was brutal. We were poor. Not my father might cut my allowance poor. We were do we pay the electric bill or buy groceries poor. We fought. We fought about money, about the leaky faucet, about whose turn it was to buy the cheap toilet paper. But we were a team. We were in the trenches together. I'd come home from a 12-hour shift, smelling like garlic and salmon, and he'd be there, with a cheap beer and a bowl of ramen, and he'd rub my feet. I'd wake up on a Saturday, and he'd have already cleaned the entire apartment. We were building something real. My old life felt like a distant, strange dream. I had zero contact with my family. They had, as promised, erased me. I sent one final letter to my mother, a desperate, last-ditch plea for connection, for something. It came back a week later, unopened, with "Return to sender" scrawled across the front in my father's unmistakable angry handwriting. That was the final, clean break. The wound closed. The scar formed. I was no longer Amelia Brentwood. I was just Amelia. And I was, for the first time, okay with that. After 5 years of this relentless grind, we were surviving. We weren't drowning, but we were treading water. And we were getting tired. We'd paid off our credit card debt. We had a tiny, respectable savings account. But we were stuck. Leo's art was incredible. Dark, powerful, and beautiful. But it wasn't selling. It was too challenging, too big, too raw for the small Philadelphia galleries. He was getting frustrated, his passion dimming under the weight of the construction work. One night, he was in a particularly dark place. "This is it, isn't it?" he'd said, staring at a massive, half-finished metal piece that was taking up our entire living room. "I'm just a construction worker who makes weird shit in his spare time. I dragged you into this. I dragged you down." "Don't you dare say that," I said, my voice fierce. I looked at the sculpture. And then, I looked at it differently. I wasn't an art historian anymore. I was a businesswoman. I had spent the last 5 years working in a high-end restaurant, a place where design was everything. "You're not just a sculptor, Leo," I said. An idea. A tiny, wild spark, igniting in my brain. "You're a designer. What's the difference?" He grumbled. "The difference," I said, "is marketing." I grabbed a legal pad. "Your art is amazing, but it's art. It's a hard sell. But your process, that's what's unique. You're using reclaimed, recycled, sustainable materials. You're not just welding junk. You're transforming it. What if we stop trying to sell sculptures and start trying to sell installations, bespoke architectural design, high-end, sustainable luxury metalwork for restaurants, for hotels, for corporate lobbies?" He looked at me like I had grown a second head. "Amelia, I'm a welder, not a furniture maker. You're a craftsman," I insisted. "We just need to rebrand. We need to stop being Leo the artist and start being Something else. Something strong. Something classic. I scribbled on the pad. Aethelred. Like the Old English king. Aethelred Designs. It sounds old world, powerful, like it's been around for 100 years. Aethelred Designs, he repeated, a slow smile spreading across his face. I don't hate that. That night, everything changed. We weren't just a couple anymore. We were partners. We formed an LLC, Aethelred Designs. Leo was the chief creative officer. I, finally putting my marketing background and my hard-won business savvy to use, was the CEO. We used our entire, meager savings to rent a small, slightly less freezing studio space and print professional business cards. The hustle was different now. It was focused. I spent my days off, not sleeping, but in my old waitress uniform. It got me in the door, cold calling restaurant owners, architects, and high-end contractors. I was relentless. You don't just want a light fixture, I'd tell them. You want a statement. You want sustainable, bespoke art that no one else has. Most of them told me to get lost. But one, a trendy, up-and-coming restaurateur named Maria, saw the vision. She gave us a small $5,000 contract to design and build the bar shelving for her new place. We worked on that project for a month, sleeping in shifts. We poured our entire souls into it. Leo crafted the most beautiful, intricate shelving from reclaimed industrial pipes and salvaged brass. It was a masterpiece. When Maria saw it, she cried. The restaurant opened. The critics came to review the food, but they raved about the design. They called the bar a stunning work of industrial art. The day after that review, my phone rang. It was an architect from a boutique hotel firm. He wanted to talk about a lobby installation. The hotel lobby contract was a game changer. It was a $50,000 deal. It was more money than we had ever seen in our lives. It was also, we quickly realized, completely beyond our means. The materials alone, the sheer volume of high-grade, reclaimed steel and copper, would cost us nearly $30,000 upfront. The hotel, as was standard, wouldn't pay the full fee until installation was complete. We were trapped. We had the contract, but we didn't have the capital to execute it. We were going to lose the deal. I spent a week trying to get a business loan. It was a joke. Aethelred Designs, with its 6 months of history and its 2-person team, one a former waitress, one a construction worker, was not exactly a blue-chip investment. Every bank in Philadelphia laughed me out of the office. I was sitting in our studio, defeated, staring at the numbers, when a memory surfaced. A memory I had pushed down for years. My mother's brother, Uncle Ben. He was the real black sheep of my mother's family. A quiet, eccentric man who had dropped out in the 70s, moved to Vermont, and become a successful, if somewhat reclusive, furniture designer. He and my father, Charles, despised each other. My father saw him as a dropout socialist, and Ben saw my father as a soulless corporate shark. He and my mother had a strained, but still existing, relationship. He had adored my other mother, my biological mom. He'd shown up at my Yale graduation, a fact that had infuriated my father, and had slipped me a piece of paper. "If that windbag ever really screws you over," he'd whispered, "you call me." I hate that guy. I still had the number. It was a long shot. A desperate, humiliating long shot. But it was the only one I had. I dialed the Vermont area code, my hands shaking. He answered on the second ring. "Ben's woodshop, Uncle Ben," I said, my voice small. It's Amelia Brentwood, or, well, just Amelia." There was a long pause. "Amelia," he said finally, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I wondered if you'd ever call. So he finally did it, huh? He finally pushed you out." 10 years ago, actually," I said, a bitter laugh escaping me. "And you're just calling me now? Stubborn, just like your grandmother." "What do you need, kid?" I told him everything. The last 10 years. The struggle, the grind, Leo, the new company, the hotel contract, the $30,000 brick wall we had just hit. I wasn't asking for a handout. I was just, I don't know what I was doing, venting, maybe. He was quiet when I finished. "So," he said, "you're telling me you're broke, you're desperate, but you have a signed $50,000 contract from a major hotel firm, and all you need is $30,000 in capital to execute it?" "Yes, that's about the size of it. Send me the contract," he said, "and your business plan, and your LLC paperwork, and a picture of this Leo's work. You have 1 hour." He hung up. I scrambled, emailing him everything. The contract, the business plan I'd written years ago, photos of the bar shelving. I sat there, staring at my email, my heart pounding. 2 hours later, an email alert popped up from my business bank account. "Deposit received, $50,000. Sender, Green Mountain Holdings, LLC." I just stared. 50,000, not 30. My phone rang. It was Ben. "Okay," he said, his voice all business. "30 is what you need. 20 is what you deserve. Don't pay me back with interest. Pay me back with equity. I'm investing. I'm your first partner. 10% of Ethelred Designs. Deal?" I was speechless. "Uncle Ben, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," he grunted. "Just make good stuff and make a hell of a lot of money. The best revenge on a man like your father isn't screaming. It's succeeding on your own terms. Now, get off the phone. I have a chair to build." He hung up. That $50,000 was rocket fuel. We completed the hotel lobby. It was a triumph. The design blogs went insane for it. They called it revolutionary, the new face of sustainable luxury. And my phone did not stop ringing. The next 4 years were a blur. Ethelred Designs exploded. The hotel lobby had been a calling card, and suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of us. Architects, developers, high-end restaurant groups. They all wanted the Ethelred touch. The poor sculptor and the disowned daughter were, all of a sudden, the hottest names in architectural design. We were a perfect team. Leo was the soul. His creative genius was boundless. He designed massive, breathtaking metalwork installations, custom furniture, entire facades. He was a master, and now he finally had the resources to execute his vision. I was the engine and the armor. I was the CEO. I handled the contracts, the financials, the client presentations, the corporate strategy. I took his brilliant, raw, chaotic ideas, and I packaged them, priced them, and sold them for staggering sums. We worked 90-hour weeks. We lived on airplanes. We expanded, hiring a small, dedicated team of young, hungry designers and artisans. We opened a massive 20,000-square-foot studio in a reclaimed foundry, a space big enough for Leo's most ambitious projects. We were no longer poor. We were rich, not just comfortable, not just successful. We were wealthy. We were landing multi-million-dollar contracts to design flagship stores in New York, luxury hotels in Miami, tech headquarters in Silicon Valley. Leo, the poor artist, was now being profiled in Architectural Digest as the anonymous design genius. We'd made a strategic decision to keep his face and name out of the press, letting the work be the star, which only fueled the mystique. And me, Amelia, the gallery assistant, was negotiating with billionaires, my old prosecutor's mind resurrected and retooled for the boardroom. I was a shark, and I was loving it. We bought a house, a beautiful, modern, glass and steel structure on a few acres of land outside the city, a place we'd designed ourselves, complete with a massive, separate studio for Leo. We were happy. We were partners, in every sense of the word. And through all of this, for 10 solid years, there was only silence from the East Coast. Not a single call, not a single letter, not a single email. My family had erased me, just as they'd promised. And I had, in turn, built a world so complete, so full, that they had no place in it. I almost never thought about them. Almost. The past, as they say, is never dead. It's not even past. The news came to me not as a call, but as a headline on my financial newsfeed. I was sitting in my beautiful, sun-drenched home office, going over quarterly projections, when I saw it. The Wall Street Journal alert. Brentwood Industries files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, cites insurmountable global competition and crushing debt. I just stared at the headline. My father's empire. The legacy I was supposed to marry into, the one I was disowned for rejecting. It was gone. I clicked the article. It was a bloodbath. My father, in his arrogance, had refused to innovate. He'd clung to his old-world manufacturing plants in New England, ignoring the global shift to faster, cheaper, overseas production. Brentwood Textiles, once a giant, was now an irrelevant, costly dinosaur. To stay afloat, Charles had made a series of increasingly reckless, desperate investments in high-risk markets, and they had all, spectacularly, blown up in his face. The company was hemorrhaging money, the creditors were circling, and the whole, century-old empire was collapsing in on itself. I felt nothing. Not sadness. Not, to my surprise, even satisfaction. It was like reading about a foreign company I had no connection to. I closed the browser and went back to my projections. It was not my problem. 3 days later, my phone rang. An unknown number from a Connecticut area code. I let it go to voicemail. A message popped up. I pressed play. Amelia, darling, is that you? It was my mother's voice. A voice I had not heard in 10 years. It was thin, reedy, stripped of all its old, icy authority. It was the voice of a person I didn't know. Darling, I don't know if this is even your number, but we're in trouble. Awful trouble. Your father, he's a broken man. We've lost everything, Amelia. The house. Everything. We have nowhere to go. She was weeping. A real, raw, ugly sob. Please, darling. I know we had our differences, but you're our daughter. We're driving to Philadelphia. We didn't know where else to go. We're hoping. Can we just see you? We have nothing. The call ended. I sat there, my hand on my phone. They were coming here. They weren't just calling to beg for money. They were showing up on my doorstep, like refugees from a war of their own making. They assumed, after a decade of silence, that I was still the responsible one, that I would be their safety net. I looked at Leo, who had come in, his face questioning. I told him. He just nodded slowly. So he said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I whispered, the old, familiar weight of duty settling on my shoulders for the first time in a decade. "Yes, you do," he said, putting his hands on my shoulders, his gaze firm. "You're going to see them, and you're going to remember who you are, and who they are. No more ambushes, Amelia. This time you own the room." He was right. I texted my mother back. A simple, cold, and devastatingly polite message. "I'm sorry to hear of your difficulties. You can meet me at my office. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Be on time." My office is on the top floor of a reclaimed 19th century foundry, the same one we'd rented as our first studio. Now, Aethelred Designs owned the entire building. The ground floor is a massive, state-of-the-art fabrication workshop. The top floor is our corporate headquarters. It's a masterpiece of our design, all reclaimed steel, old-growth timber, and massive, 20-foot windows. It's the kind of space that whispers, rather than shouts, its power. I was in the main conference room, the one with a 30-foot solid walnut table Leo had built, when my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Brentwood? A Mr. and Mrs. Brentwood are here to see you. They don't have an appointment." "Send them in, Kate," I said, my voice calm. They walked in, and for a second, I felt a flicker of that old, childish pity. They looked old, beaten. My father, Charles, who had always been so imposing in his bespoke suits, was wearing a rumpled, off-the-rack blazer and looked like he had aged 20 years. My mother, Eleanor, her icy perfection melted, her hair thinning, her face a web of fine, panicked lines. They looked poor. They stopped dead when they saw the office, their eyes widening in shock. They were clearly expecting my gallery to be a small, dusty storefront. Not this. "It's my office," I said, not standing. I gestured to the chairs at the far end of the table. "Please, sit." They sat, looking small and lost in the oversized, custom leather chairs. "So," I began, my voice as neutral as a bank teller's. 10 years. How have you been?" My mother burst into tears. A practiced, familiar performance. "Oh, Amelia, it's been a nightmare. Your father, the company, it's all gone. They took the house. We're staying at a motel." "I read about the bankruptcy," I said, my voice still neutral. "Poor market predictions. Failure to innovate. It was predictable." My father flinched, but said nothing. We need help, Amelia," my mother said, leaning forward, her voice a desperate, pleading whisper. We're destitute. We have nothing. You're our only hope. Alone. Just enough to find a small apartment, to get back on our feet." "Alone," I repeated, tapping my pen on the legal pad in front of me. "I see. And William? My brother? The heir. Where is he in all this?" "Gone." My father spoke for the first time, his voice a gravelly rasp. "The day the bankruptcy was announced, he cleaned out the last of the accounts his mother had hidden, and he moved to Singapore. Hasn't returned our calls." It seemed the Brentwood legacy of betrayal was still going strong. "So, you've come to me," I said. "The daughter you disowned. The one you told, and I quote, would never be more than a disappointment. We were wrong," my mother cried. "We see that now. You've done so well. This gallery. It's so lovely. We're so proud of you." "This isn't a gallery, Mother," I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. "It's a headquarters." A headquarters?" she stammered. "For my company, Aethelred Designs." My father and mother just stared at me, blankly. The name meant nothing to them. They were so far removed from the world of new money, of real innovation, that the hottest design firm in the country wasn't even on their radar. "Right," I said. "Well, let me reintroduce myself. I'm Amelia Brentwood. I'm the CEO of Aethelred Designs. We're a multi-million-dollar architectural design firm, My poor artist husband, as you once called him, is the most sought-after and anonymous sculptor in the country. We just signed a $50 million contract to design the new Hudson Yards Tower lobby. The one your old friend Gregory Vandersloot's bank, I believe, just lost the financing for. The color drained from my father's face. He knew that name. He knew that deal. He couldn't make the pieces fit. You're Aethelred? He whispered, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The firm that Brentwood Textiles has been begging for a meeting with? The one we were trying to get a materials contract with? Our last-ditch effort? That's the one, I said, my smile widening. I've been handling that correspondence myself, actually. I believe my last response to your brother's desperate emails was, respectfully, we're moving in a different direction. Does that sound right? My father looked like he was going to have a heart attack. My mother was just shaking her head, whispering, No, it's not possible. Oh, it's possible, I said. You never bothered to look. You were so busy looking down on me, you never saw me rising. I let them sit in the silence for a long, heavy, suffocating minute. I let them absorb the full, devastating scale of their miscalculation. The daughter they had thrown away was now, quite literally, the only person on earth who could have saved them, and she hadn't. So, I said finally, all business. Alone. That's what you're here for. And as the CEO of this company, I have to evaluate all investments based on their potential return. I looked at my father. And based on your past performance, your investment in my brother, your failure to innovate at Brentwood, frankly, Charles, you're a terrible risk. I'm going to have to decline. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. But, I continued, leaning forward, I'm not my father. I don't believe in just cutting people off. I pulled a piece of paper from my desk. This is a job application. My father stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. A job? He whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and profound aristocratic offense. That's right, I said, my voice bright, almost cheerful. I'm not going to give you a handout, Dad. I know how much you value work. How much you believe in pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. I believe you called my job at the gallery, quote, character building. Well, I'm offering you a chance to build some character. I slid the application across the table. It's an entry-level position, assistant logistics manager, at our Philadelphia foundry. It pays $50,000 a year, plus benefits. It's a start. You'll be reporting to our head of operations, a brilliant woman named Maria, who, funny enough, used to be a waitress with me. My father's face was a mask of pure, purple-faced fury. You would dare to offer me charity. No, I corrected him, my voice still light. I'm offering you a job. Charity is when you give someone something they haven't earned. Like, say, the blind loyalty and financial backing you gave your son for 30 years. This is a wage. You'll be expected to show up on time. You'll have to, work. This is an insult, my mother shrieked, finally finding her voice. We are Brentwoods. You can't treat us like staff. Why not? I asked, my smile finally fading, replaced by a cold, quiet ice. You treated me like a servant for a decade. You treated me like a bargaining chip, a broodmare for a banking family. You humiliated me. You erased me, and you threw me out of your house with nothing but the clothes on my back. And now you come here, to my house, to my company, and you beg? You don't get to be proud anymore, Mom. You're broke. You're bankrupt. You have nothing. And I am the only person on this planet who is willing to offer you a lifeline. So I suggest you take it. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. The job offer is on the table, Dad. You have 24 hours to accept. If you do, my assistant will arrange for a relocation stipend, a modest one, for a one-bedroom apartment near the foundry. If you don't, well, I hear the motels in Philly are slightly cheaper than the ones in Greenwich. Good luck. My mother looked at my father, her face a mask of desperation. Charles, do something. Tell her. My father looked at the application. He looked at me, at my cold, steady, unforgiving eyes, and he just crumbled. The arrogance, the power, the Brentwood authority. It all just evaporated, leaving behind a tired, terrified old man. I'll take it, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'll take the job. My mother just stared at him, her mouth open in a silent, horrified, "Oh!" The king had just abdicated. The empire was well and truly dead. Good, I said, nodding to my assistant, Kate, who had been waiting by the door. Kate will validate your parking. It's been 6 months since the reckoning, as Leo and I have come to call it. My father, true to his word, is living in a small, furnished apartment in Philadelphia. He's the assistant logistics manager at our foundry. He works. He shows up at 7 a.m., he wears a hard hat, and he does his job. He's quiet, he's humbled, and he's different. He called me last week, not to beg, not to complain, but to tell me he had identified a 5% efficiency leak in our shipping and receiving protocol. He'd prepared a spreadsheet. It was the first real, non-toxic conversation we have had in my entire adult life. My mother did not fare as well. She refused to go with him. She called him a traitor and a fool. She is currently, I've heard, living in Florida, in a guest cottage on the property of one of her last remaining friends. She sends me long, rambling, hateful emails every few weeks, which my assistant dutifully deletes. She will never change. My brother William, upon hearing that his father was now working for me, and that I was the new de facto head of the family, apparently had a full-blown meltdown in a Singapore nightclub, and is, I've heard, in some sort of wellness retreat. And me? I am, for the first time, at peace. My relationship with my father is a work in progress. It's not warm, it may never be, but it's real. He is, for the first time, earning his place in my life, rather than just demanding it. Last week, my Uncle Ben, my savior, my investor, came to visit. He walked through the Aethelred headquarters, his eyes wide. "My God, Amelia," he'd said, you actually did it. You not only beat him, you became him. Only a better version. I had a good teacher, I said, squeezing his hand. We were standing in my office, looking out over the city. My new, custom-built desk was made of reclaimed steel and 100-year-old oak, a piece Leo had designed for me. On it sat a small, framed photo. It wasn't of my parents. It wasn't of the Brentwood estate. It was a picture of me and Leo, 5 years ago, covered in grime, exhausted, but grinning in front of that first restaurant bar we'd built, the night we'd finished it. The night it all began. "You know," I said to Ben, "for 10 years, my family told me I was a disappointment because I chose a poor artist over their legacy. But they had it all wrong." I looked at the city, at the new, sustainable tower we were about to start work on. They were the ones obsessed with money. I was the one who was obsessed with value. They were trying to preserve a legacy. I was busy building one.